So now I'd like to introduce our first set of speakers from the Ontario Woodlot Association. John Pineau is the Executive Director, and Ben Gwilliam is their private lands inventory analyst. So take it away, gentlemen. I just quit sharing my screen. There we go.
Excellent. So everyone can see that.
Yeah, you
Slide
just
okay on their screen? Excellent.
Yes, perfect.
Great. Okay, John, I'll let you get started.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and thanks, Shelley and Forestry Futures Trust for arranging this and inviting us to present. We're pretty proud of what's come to pass as a result of this initial, what we call a pilot project on private land in the United Counties of Prescott and Russell. And I've got the easy job today. I'm giving kind of the 50,000-foot overview and at the beginning and the end, and Ben is going to give the meat and potatoes of everything. So I think you'll get a lot out of it, and you'll see what has resulted, and it's pretty good stuff. So you can go to the next slide, Ben. So here's the presentation overview. We'll talk a little bit about what we are and what we do, and then Ben will get into sort of the whole impetus behind this project and give an overview and the methods and the validation results, everything that we did with the United Counties of Prescott and Russell for inventory and the potential economically, what it gave us to take away and work with, what we learned, kind of thing. And I'll talk about the impact on private land forestry and a broader inventory program at the end. But that's really what we'll summarize. And I just want to point out at the beginning here that Ben was actually a University of Toronto Master of Forest Conservation student when this project, for the most part, transpired, and he was working on an internship with the OWA, and he did his capstone paper on it. It's been really well publicized and drawn a lot of attention. So, next slide, Ben. So a little bit about the OWA. We're a nonprofit, membership-based organization. We're all about good, sustainable forest management practices, best forest management practices on private land, woodlots, that sort of thing. And we're very much into helping each other be the best possible stewards of the land that we own. And that takes a lot of forms, but it's mainly knowledge sharing and knowledge exchange amongst ourselves and with Forest Service providers and experts. And we're proud 31-year-old organization with a growing membership. I think our membership in the last few years has doubled. We're up towards 3,000 and still growing strong. So next slide, Ben. Yeah. And we have a whole array of membership products and services that gives a lot of value. I'll just highlight a couple of them. The Ontario Woodlander, our quarterly magazine, is much lauded and very popular, and gives our land owners, our woodlot members, information and practical advice on what they do to be good stewards and practice sustainable forest management. And there's a whole set of different sort of modern media and activities going on. We have 22 chapters, about 100 activities and events across those chapters. But the big thing, and we'll talk about a flagship program today now at the end of this presentation and how this project helped to make that happen. But we do a lot of new and very relevant programs and projects for our membership, and private land forest inventory is certainly a flagship and a key one. Next one. Thanks, Ben. And again, 22 chapters across southern and central Ontario. We are looking to expand into the north with some chapters and more members. There's a lot of interest there, and that's the plan over the next 2 years. But yeah, that's where our members are spread across these chapters, and very active and engaged volunteer membership. We have 8 staff and lots going on. So, and the next one. I think this is my final slide. So to me, this has been probably just about the best project and program that I've worked on in 40 years in the forest sector. And we want to thank Forestry Futures Trust and CRIBE in particular, but these other companies, University of Toronto, academia, of course, Cascades, the company, and Tree Dimension, Murray Woods, company that really helped mentor and help guide us, has been learned the ropes with LiDAR and whatnot. But this catalyzed a comprehensive program, and I'll talk about it at the end of the presentation when Ben's finished. But it really set the stage for doing some good work in Ontario. And so we'll get into the details of this specific project and the pilot that Ben undertook for us as an MFC out of the University of Toronto as an intern. So go for it, Ben.
Thank you, John. So the impetus for this project was really a long time coming. As most of you know, the south of the province outside of the SFLs hasn't really been inventoried since the late 70s. So there's a huge gap in information in the south of the province, a dire need for forest inventory. And of course, LiDAR is catching on. You know, it's being flown for digital terrain mapping across municipalities, across Ontario. And I have to give a lot of credit to the visionary folks at the OWA and Larose Forest, you know, John Pineau and Al Stinson and Murray Woods and Steve Hunter. They all came up with the idea of, and I'm sure I'm missing some other folks, but they all came up with the idea of using this LiDAR data set that now exists over the southern portion of the province to develop industry standard enhanced forest resource inventory, such as is being developed as part of the Term 2 FRI products in the SFLs. And of course, you know, a large part of what the OWA does, one of our mandates, is to promote private land forestry as a sector in Ontario. And a great way to do that is to provide such a critical tool as inventory to ensure sustainable forest management. So we came up with two primary research questions for this project, and that was, can we apply these techniques to produce an adequate EFRI over an urban rural area within Southern Ontario using these LiDAR data sets that are available publicly? And how can we model the temporal change that has occurred since the LiDAR was flown, and can we glean relevant economic insights from this data set? How can we use this inventory to promote the economic productivity of forests in the South? So a bit of the context around the project: the study area was the United Counties of Prescott and Russell, about a 2,000 square kilometer area just east of Ottawa. We wanted to produce a raster-based FRI that is equivalent to those produced on Crown lands, and we are going to be taking an area-based approach to that. So what that means is that all attributes that we're producing, and we're producing all industry standard attributes, so your basal areas, your volumes, your quad mean diameters, and we're doing that all by size class. So we have our pole, small, medium, and large saw log size classes that we're predicting for. And we wanted to, and the area-based approach just means that we are predicting these values per hectares. So each pixel represents a per hectare value. And we wanted to include some sort of species information because that didn't exist over the greater UCPR landscape. The LiDAR data was flown, the LiDAR was flown in early spring of 2015 with a point density of 4 points per square meter. And this led to a couple challenges. One being that this is leaf-off data. So in the SFLs, LiDAR is typically flown in leaf-on conditions to capture more of that canopy information. And of course, looking at the date, this LiDAR data was severely out of date for our purposes in 2021 here. But we had a great foundation to work from. And the folks at Larose with Murray Woods had already produced a FRI using this LiDAR data over their properties, which represent about 10% of the total area of UCPR. And they had already established 200 calibration plots within a year of the LiDAR being flown. And you can see that those calibration plots span a range of forest conditions, and they are placed primarily in those forest types that are economically relevant for this area. So a lot of your conifer and pine, or your plantations and your red and white pine and spruce plantations as well. Sorry. So there were four major steps that we had to take from this point, from where we were with the LaRose Forest Inventory. And that was to evaluate the applicability of the calibration plots that were done and how well do they apply to the rest of the landscape of UCPR. We need to generate some landscape species level information. That's a critical component of any inventory. We had to determine how the forest cover had changed over time, over the 7 years that has elapsed. And of course, we need to find a way to grow these inventory attributes to glean some relevant information for today. So to evaluate the calibration plot's applicability, we did a principal components analysis. And what you're looking at here, all of the red dots surrounded by that red bounding box are the calibration plots themselves. And they represent the structural variability that is captured in all of these plots. So structural variability being like, you know, the different densities and heights of points within these plots. Each of these dots represent a plot of about 400 meters squared. The blue dots in the background are all of the points of structural variation across the entire UCPR landscape. So that greater bounding box is also including what we identified were outside of the calibration plot bounding box, were alder, swamp, and cedar conditions, which weren't relevant for management in this area as they aren't typically harvested. And as well, you can see on the right there, this being an urban rural area, there was a lot of infrastructure, hydro poles, edge conditions, you know, where the forest is transitioning into a field. That wasn't captured by the plots. And again, that's not important because we're not going to be modeling attributes for, you know, cell phone towers. So we found that the two principal components cover about 86% of the variability, and the important parts were covered, and we felt confident that we could go ahead with the calibration plots as they existed, meaning we wouldn't have to establish any new ones. So these are the results of the inventory modeling. We did a random forest machine learning approach. This was all done by Murray Woods and for LaRose, and then myself with Murray Woods for the rest of UCPR. This was based just on forest structure. We didn't separate by species to do modeling. We were just looking at the full range of structures across all species. And what you're looking at is the training samples as part of the random forest algorithm. So it keeps some of the observations out to train with, and then it predicts and it compares its own predictions. And what you want is a very tight cluster on that trend line. And you can see height is very well clustered. Basal area, there's a bit more spread. Quad mean diameter has pretty good cluster. Volume is pretty good. Calculated stems is pretty good, but you know, it's not great. And that is because we don't manage at the plot level, we manage at the stand level. So when we average these out to a stand, meaning you can see in these three images here, we're taking all of the pixels within that stand and coming up with an average. In this case, we're looking at basal area. You can see we're doing a pretty good job, right? So we have our cruised stands in the brown column for basal areas, and what the LiDAR had actually predicted for those stands in the blue. And overall, we are at a root mean squared error percentage, which is a useful tool to determine how far off you are because it uses the units that you are measuring. So in this case, we are off by 8% or 2.7 meters squared per hectare in basal area. There are some outliers, and when we include those outliers, that bumps it up to about 10%, but we've determined that these outliers were due to a high level of coppicing of red maple. So it wasn't so much that it wasn't a fault of our training that we basically we could remove these outliers from our initial training set. Sorry, I lost my my notes here. Anyway, when you look at the BA distribution down there, poles, it's not great, but when we get into the larger size classes, we're doing a very good job in this specific example, which is a white pine, white spruce stand of predicting based on the cruising values that we measured. And of course, we need to come up with some sort of species information. And we did a analysis using time series Sentinel-2 satellite data. We put in training plots in 2021, or all our training samples are from 2021. So it's a mixture of plots and full stands that we were given species information on. And the imagery spans a time period from December 2020. We used an acquisition in April, June, July, September, and October. So we're capturing, early leaf out trees in the spring. We're capturing trees that may hold their leaves later on into the season, say, your mid-tolerance like oaks and whatnot. And from that, we could develop a pretty accurate assessment of the species distribution, mostly in terms of forest type or leading species. So you can see below the forest types that we predicted, with a true positive rate being the percent chance that it was predicting the actual true value. So 88% of the time it was getting white pine correct. 93% of the time it was getting red pine correct, and so on. So our third step was to analyze how the forest cover has changed. And a lot of the change had been conversion to agriculture or urban development. So what we used was up-to-date 2021 NDVI layer. So this is allowing us to determine the photosynthetic capacity of ground cover. And we chose an acquisition early in the season from May 18th that would ensure that most of the crops weren't already growing, because that would, it'd be hard to differentiate those, especially when it's corn, when it's a very tall crop that we couldn't clip out with a canopy height model. We wanted to get that before there was a lot of growth there, so we could see the trees that have already at this point leafed out to the point where they can get captured with an NDVI, but we're not getting the fields. And you can see that represented in that bottom right image there. We combined that with our original canopy height model from 2015 with a cutoff at 3 meters. And basically where those two layers agree, where the NDVI is showing a high photosynthetic capacity and the vegetation is above 3 meters, meaning we're not getting grassy areas or whatnot, we can be confident to say that, okay, this is where current forest cover most likely is on the landscape. So growing the inventory forward was the focus of my capstone project. And working with Algonquin Forest Tech students out of Pembroke campus, we established about 126 variable radius plots where we were measuring diameters, heights, and species. And we stratified these plots across a range of basal area classes, you can see on the left there, as well as a range of forest types. And we compared two approaches to predicting growth. We compared a polynomial linear regression or a parametric approach versus a machine learning model or a non-parametric approach. And we were predicting growth increment here over 6 years for the primary attributes you see below. And these are the results of that modeling. You can see that it's pretty decent, 11% RMSE. So again, that's the value, that basal area value, it's only off by 11%. However, the random forest model, while it was doing a bit better of a job in predicting growth, we decided to go with a regression approach, because as you can see in the bottom right there, a polynomial regression, the curve more represents a growth increment curve that you would see in a forest, where there is a decline in increment as the age of the forest increases. So what happened with the random forest approach was anything that we didn't have training data for, it was not doing a good job of predicting. So it was giving wildly inaccurate values for areas that we just didn't have the resources to put plots in and measure. While the regression approach, we could follow that trend line and we could do a bit better of a job in predicting forest structures and types that we hadn't sampled. And so that's why we went with a regression approach here. So having all of that set up, we now had our updated inventory for 2021. And so we could do our economic analysis aspect, and this is specific to red pine plantation management, which is most relevant for this specific area. There's a lot of pine plantations in need of intervention. And we took three of the attributes for plantations. We did an average height, we looked at average diameter, and we looked at the density of trees per hectare that was predicted as part of the LiDAR. Basal areas, if we were looking at non-plantations, that's something we could include. So we could split the basal areas by size class and look at where we can target areas with high basal area to bring it down to where the target basal area should be. So we took a density management approach to this using those three first attributes that I just mentioned. And with the rasters, we can filter and highlight areas in the landscape that are in need of intervention. And we did a combination of stand densities and average diameters. Where there was high density and high diameter, that indicated a need for intervention or an overstocked stand. And we're splitting this up at the parcel level. So management here would be done by individual landowners. They're unlikely to, we can't rely on them to collaborate, even if the stand extends into another property. So it made more sense to divide everything up by the property lines rather than stands. And of course, with this information, we could also do a network analysis. So here, this circle, 25-kilometer radius, is targeting a close proximal grouping of high density stands. And this could be leveraged by other OWA initiatives, specifically our cooperatives, which look at landowners who live in close proximity to each other, sharing the costs of forest management. They can benefit from economies of scale this way, and we facilitate these cooperatives. We provide all the resources for them to access the information and forest professionals to conduct all the management. So this type of tool is very powerful for us to use to highlight areas that we could be setting up new cooperatives on. And of course, with network analysis, we can also determine transportation costs dependent upon the distance to the mill. And in this case, we determined Heidemann's was the closest large-scale mill that could handle capacity for this area. So looking at an individual property here, you can see it laid out. It's a red pine plantation. It's been predicted to have just under 2,000 trees per hectare. We don't know the age. We do know the height, and we do know the average diameter of these trees, and we know the area. And this has been classified as an overstock stand, right, because of this high density and high average diameter. So with competition for resources, that means that this stand is near collapse. You're going to see slower growth. You're going to see more senescence. And if we're not in there intervening and capturing that value, Mother Nature is going to, do her thing, and she's going to these trees will die and the value will be lost. So not only are you getting the economic value from it, you're also applying a thinning treatment to ensure the long-term health of this stand. So using a density management diagram, you can see the current stocking level in the red circle there. And moving up the height curve to get it, basically you want it to be between the dashed blue line and the dashed orange line, and that is an ideally stocked stand. Anything left of the blue line is understocked, anything right of the orange line is considered overstocked. So we can move that across the height curve up to within that ideally stocked location. And this is the just economic analysis we could do on this particular property here. So it's telling us that we need to thin about 700 trees to get it to that target. However, a rule of thirds states that you shouldn't remove any more than a third of the total volume in any one thinning treatment. So the first thinning treatment should only be removing 610 trees per hectare. Using the y-axis of the DMD, we can see that the average volume per tree is about 0.45 meters cubed, giving us a total harvest volume of 274 meters cubed. With the current market price, Heidemann's is buying red pine saw logs about $80 a ton right now, delivered. So we can do an analysis and say, This landowner could potentially get $11,200 in revenue for this first thinning treatment. However, that's not including costs for forest professionals to come out and do tree marking and your transportation costs to the mill. So you could say that there would be, you know, you're looking at least half of that in revenue for your first thinning treatment. And of course, with proper thinning, you're going to get greater returns in the future as that stand becomes more, I guess, healthy and grows faster with more space between these trees. So some takeaways that we took from the project. Of course, we found that municipal LiDAR data is adequate. Leaf-off LiDAR flown for terrain mapping can be used, and this is reflected in dozens of research papers, one of which is the one by White et al. That show that leaf-off LiDAR is in fact, in some cases, better than leaf-on because they found that they were more accurately predicting basal areas and volumes because there's more stem information. There's less canopy intercepting those LiDAR returns, and you're getting more of that under canopy information. However, height isn't predicted as well in leaf-off conditions. So that's a factor to consider. Growing the inventory forward, we found what wasn't an ideal situation. You're modeling on top of what you already have modeled. This doesn't capture recruitment into smaller size classes. You're only growing what's already there on the landscape. So it's better to have your LiDAR acquisition and calibration done within 5 years of when you want to produce your inventory. Otherwise, there's just been too much growth and change. In these areas of rural, farming, it's corn can be an issue, and not in this specific data set because it's flown early in the spring, but if it's flown in leaf-off conditions later in the season, you may want to set your cutoff a little higher to ensure corn isn't being captured. If you're trying to produce a forest cover mass over the entire landscape, combining an NDVI with your canopy height model would include corn if you're below 4 meters. I find anything above 4 meters, it's pretty good. For filtering out the corn or other high crops. And this, of course, produced a very powerful economic decision-making tool for us at the OWA and for landowners across the province. So using stem densities for plantations, using the size classes of basal areas for hardwoods, we can determine the current levels and where the targets should be, and then we can come up with, as you saw on the previous slide, just a very cursory economic analysis of what you could expect from a treatment. Spatial analysis in GIS can also determine easily the feasibility of access and transportation for these, and it is so important to have that parcel information to develop your stands. So that can be quite a difficult thing to get or expensive. Luckily, we had access to that through the municipality, but having that before you set off on doing an inventory like this is critical. And John, you can take it from here.
Yeah, and just for Shelley, it's about 1 minute to wrap up here. I know.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So yeah, again, thank you. That's great overview, Ben. Thanks so much. Just want to say thank you to all the funders and partners. I noticed we missed Algonquin College, who provided all that free student labor while they were fed and transported there. But having the vision and the belief in the OWA that we could do this project successfully, it's greatly appreciated, and it's made a huge difference. And that's really manifest in the next couple of slides. What we learned and what this pilot project enabled us to do is basically take that, do some proposals, and achieve some significant funding from Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund with Environment and Climate Change Canada, and $1.2 million over 5 years. Hire Ben on permanent staff, and next slide, we've got a whole array of partners involved, and we built it up to a $3 million multi-partner program over 5 years, and we're into year 2 already, and we're going to produce private land forest inventory for the whole province. Every landowner will have some form of really decent inventory up to date, at least wherever there's LiDAR, and that's in most areas. There's a lot of it out there. It's pretty pervasive, and we'll make it happen. So Ben's working diligently away on that, and we've got a great project set up, a great program set up, and it's going well. So thank you again to the funders. Thanks everyone, and